Dr. Kern is the founding partner and CEO of Convergent Performance, a veteran-owned think tank located in Colorado Springs. Convergent was formed in 2003, specifically dedicated to reducing human error and improving performance in high-risk environments such as aviation, but also military operations, surgical teams, law enforcement, and firefighting. Dr. Kern is one of the world's leading authorities on human performance in time-constrained, error-intolerant environments, and has lectured on this subject around the globe for nearly 2 decades. So to present the keynote address this morning, please welcome on stage Tony Kern.
Oh, thanks, Melissa. And I appreciate you got to love a wonderful British turn of a phrase. He can turn junior varsity into thoroughbred just like that. Well, my greetings from Mark Rosekind, and please don't get me started on the U.S. government sequester. I'll start a riot. Driving us all crazy, isn't it? Bill, as always, spot on. And if I were taking notes, and I was, I'd try to encapsulate what you said this morning in 3 words, and that is predictable is preventable. And I'm going to take you up on the challenge. You asked the question, where and when is our next accident going to occur? And while I'm not sure where or when, I'm reasonably certain I can tell you who and why. And I'd like to spend a few moments with you this morning to talk about some of the things that we've learned over the past 15 or 20 years, looking at what appears to be a plateau of human error and, dare I say it, occasional unprofessionalism in our industry. So if we could go ahead and bring up the first slide, that might be it, huh? Push the button. So I started getting into this whole arena actually about 10 years before I was asked this question in 2003. At the time, I was the director of aviation for the U.S. Forest Service. Many of you I recognize from those days fighting wildland fires with 750-odd helicopters and a few fixed-wing air tankers when the wings were staying on them back in the early part of this century. Sounds funny to say that, doesn't it? While in Washington, D.C., I got a phone call from this gentleman, and the United States Marine Corps had just tasked him to, quote, operationalize safety. Get safety out of the hands of the safety nerds. Let's make it a real manly thing. Let's find out why some of our best and brightest, flying good aircraft, good weather, highly experienced, end up not coming home. Why is that? And the Marines had just gone through an 18-month period, one of the worst in their history, and asked that question. Why do good people make dumb mistakes? So, Bill, in answer to your question, who and why, I'll tell you who. I believe it will be someone who has never had an accident before. I believe it'll be someone that's both highly experienced and highly respected. I believe it's going to be someone, if you look just a bit deeper using that transformational thinking and that deeper analysis, that has disengaged a little bit from his or her profession, who believes that the thousands of hours and years of accident-free flying give them a certain leniency, which leads to item number 4. I believe it will involve some act of noncompliance. So as we move to answer this question for the United States Marine Corps, we began to look hard at some of the basic premises that we've always thought were advantages. We call the program there the Global War on Error, and it's kind of stuck. And the first basic premise I'd like to challenge today is this idea that older is better, that hours are good. You know, when I remember when Southwest Airlines had their first accident. You remember, they took one of their 737s and into Burbank, I guess it was, on a wet runway, high, hot, and idle, my 3 favorite places. Landed halfway down a wet runway, slid off the end of the runway into an Exxon station or something like that down there. And the first thing that their public relations department said was, we just don't understand this. These were 2 of our most experienced pilots. Well, you know what the investigation revealed? That they'd been salvaging unstable approaches like that many, many times before. So one of the things that we think is happening with highly experienced aviators and highly experienced aviation engineers, and for that matter, managers and executives, is we believe we've seen it all before. We believe that the errors that we make, we will notice as errors and correct. When in reality, Dr. Bob Helmreich, God rest his soul, one of the godfathers of CRM, from the boys at UT Austin down at NASA Ames, did a study, and he found that airline crews, some of the most standardized crews in the world, can make over 200 errors before it ends up in an undesired aircraft state. 200 errors before it ends up in an undesired, that's not an accident, that's just an undesired aircraft state. So what do you learn from your mistakes in an environment that is so safe and so redundant that you can make 200 errors without consequence? What do you learn? You learn that they don't matter. You learn non-compliance. You learn non-accountability. I'm not even sure if that's a word. Is that a word? Non-accountability? It's not underlined in red. It must be a word, right? You learn satisfaction with the status quo, and it leads to a type of hubris where we have to be transformational in thinking that flight hours comes with wisdom, comes with judgment, comes with excellence. Sometimes gray hair or no hair comes all by itself in our world. And sometimes it comes with baggage. Now here's the good news. The good news is that we're doing much, much better. And we know that. If you look at the history of aviation, you see the mishap rate has gone down over time because of technologies like wind shear avoidance and TCAS and ground proximity and soon lightning avoidance type systems. We know that. And then we come up with things like SMS, fatigue risk management systems, CRM, all of the great processes and procedures. But if we want to make that next step, we've got to be able to address the personal behaviors of individuals. And since we can't do that peer-to-peer very well anymore because of a lot of reasons, political correctness, legal reasons, etc., the best we can do is take accountability for ourselves. N equals 1. I'm not a math major, I'm a history major. N being the number of elements in a set. If we can teach people to be predictive of their own behaviors and to continue to pull up the ladder, to engage in the close fight, then they will role model that example. And I'll tell you what, 1 or 2 role models in your company getting better every day, growing where they are with the resources at hand are going to be better than 10 conferences as good as this one. Because they're going to be out there doing it every day. They're going to be out there setting new standards. They're going to be out there reversing cultures of decay and sloppiness. It all started 584 years ago when the word professional first appeared in the Oxford English Dictionary. I know Canada's a 2-language nation, so I'm sure it was in French long before it was in English. And I'm sure they forgot it sooner than we did. Okay, I'm only kidding. Easy on me. You know, on those critique forums, it still says Rosekind, so put all your critiques up there. Well, it's interesting because when professional was first written, it meant to profess, meant to vow. To vow. You profess to stay with an industry and grow within it. And originally it had a little bit to do with religious orders and trade guilds. And I'll use the example of trade guilds. When you started out in a trade guild, let's say you were a glass blower. You came in at about age 14 as an apprentice. And for a couple of years, you may shovel coal, never learning a thing except what it was like to be around glass blowers. And then, if you were lucky enough, you could apply to be a novice. And for the next 2 or 3 years, you would be taught the trade. And if you're good enough to pass the minimum check ride from the master craftsman, you'd become a journeyman. Now, speaking of French, there's a root word in the word journeyman, jour. What's that mean? Day? Day? So what did that mean? You could only work during the day? You were not night capable? What was a journeyman? No, he could only go a day's ride from the master craftsman or from the craftsman. Why do you think that was? Customer service and quality and safety. Okay? And then if you did that well enough, You eventually got your own shingle and you became a craftsman. But you were expected to go beyond that. You were expected to add to the industry itself and become a master craftsman who could train others. And eventually at the very top of this tier of a trade guild was a grandmaster craftsman. Now what happened, there's a lot of history, economics, and social demographics and things like that, but trade guilds were basically outlawed. They were seen as too elite. Hey, if I can blow glass, I don't have to go through all that crap. I want to go out and blow glass and sell a vase. Okay, fine. Right? So what happened after the trade guilds were abolished, and this is only 200-300 years ago, was that your glass got a lot crappier and people started getting hurt. So much so that the same public that demanded the abolition of the trade guilds said, what's the government going to do about it? And what the government did was establish government regulators. And they trained not to maximum standards, but to minimum standards for safe operations. And in so doing, negated the top half of the professionalism ladder. Ladies and gentlemen, that's how it happened. That's how the term professional lost its meaning. The only time we hear the word professionalism anymore is when it's preceded by two letters, U and N, right? That's wrong. So what? There are many in our industry who believe that the minimum standards are the only standards. We train to proficiency to government minimum standards. Not good enough. And we just heard all the great things CHC is doing to go above and beyond that. Right? So there's another piece of this puzzle, and it has to do with the economy. We heard about that a minute ago. When we begin to cut back, where do we cut? We cut training. We cut safety. We cut analysis. Right? Because we don't perceive it adding to the bottom line. We perceive it often as red ink. Wow, what a mistake. And then the third thing we have is ever since the entry of the government regulator and the dissolution of upper-end professionalism, we have a lot of people who believe that good enough is good enough. This is something called the performance ladder, and basically all I want to tell you is that minimum standards of effectiveness put you in a window of what I like to call the crushing grip of mediocrity, with some pretty nasty bedfellows, hazards, violations, occasional close calls, but you're good enough to earn a living. Right? The point I want to make, and we hear it all the time, we heard an example this morning. In our industry, sometimes you need to be near perfect just to live. Right? So we have to reinstill this upper level thinking. Grow where you are with the resources at hand. Good enough to earn a living is not always good enough to survive. And of course, when we have those fatal accidents, and I tracked those 4 back in October as well, and it was devastating. You look at them and you say, gosh, highly experienced, never had an accident before. How do these things happen in these companies? All right, I want to wrap up here with saying, when you travel around like I do and talk about quality and safety and professionalism, you run into some interesting guys. And I ran into a gentleman who had been a 35-year coal miner. He was testifying up on the Hill at Congress after some of the mine accidents a few years ago. His name was Ben. And boy, this is wisdom, isn't it? He talked about everything that's real happens at the coal face. Not in the offices, not in a notebook with safety data. Everything that's real happens at the coal face, that point where the rubber meets the road, or in this case, the pick or the air hammer hits the coal. He says it's where you make friends, it's where you make money, and it's where you get hurt. If the bosses would just remember that, there would be more coal, more money, more friends, and less funerals. Now that's wisdom from West Virginia. So what's the coal face in our industry? It's the people with their hands on the tools and the controls and closest to the threat and closest to the customer. It's that mechanic who needs to follow the procedures as written, or perhaps he watched someone else do it as he was growing up in a culture of noncompliance. It's a dispatcher who's got the telephone in one hand, a computer terminal in one hand, a microphone in the other, trying to make this all work. Somebody's sick, the weather's changing, we got some technology, tail numbers are moving, the customer's got different demands. Talk about somebody at the tip of the spear. Talk about somebody at the coal face. somebody we don't get much love to unless things go wrong, right? And then we give them lots of negative love. Dispatchers and schedulers. Or what about all those people in the back of our helicopters taking care of folks out there, the nurses, the paramedics, the swimmers, the divers, the rappellers, coalface operations. And of course, us lowly bus drivers in the front, right? Closest to the action, hands on the throttle, closest to the customer, that's our coalface. So in summary, I guess when we come down to predictive safety, as we look at all of these things this week, and I'm excited, I hope I see a few of you in my workshops, let's keep in mind that at the end of the day, it's got to get to the ground. The people matter. A safety management and quality management system is only as good as people's willingness to engage within it, people's willingness to comply, the ability to be transparent and fair in a just culture environment where people are held accountable no matter whether they got 10,000 hours or 10 hours, whether they got 30 years with our company or 30 minutes with our company. We have to remember that advanced technology is only as good as the aviation mechanic that's fixing it, the pilot that's operating it, and to some extent, the people that are scheduling it, buying it, selling it. We have to remember that customer service is only as good as our last face-to-face contact, phone call, or email, or in these days, tweet. I hate that word. I've got this little T-shirt I bought. I got to tell you, it's got a picture of Samuel L. Jackson on it with a gun in his hand. He says, "Say tweet one more time." I just love it. Hey, here's my coalface, and I usually use this up front in the presentation, but I'm going to wrap up with it here today. It's where two of my former students took a B-1 bomber, fully functional on a moonless night, 1992, into that mountain in Van Horn, Texas. And it really is where my quest for understanding human performance began, because I had opportunities to influence these guys. And truly, teaching, training, flying, evaluating has never been the same for me since. And the first words I ever wrote in Redefining Airmanship were these: you must never allow the complexities of the economy, your organization, your technology, your mission, or your personal life to overcome your capacity to handle the complexity of the situation. What we do is tough. What we do is complex. At the end of the day, this is all homework. It's done in advance. And it's done at places like this with people like you. So I look forward to meeting more of you this week. I hope you have a great conference. Thanks, Bill and Duncan, for putting this all on and bringing me up from the JVs to be able to chat with these guys this morning. Because remember, complacency kills, and that's not good for any of us. Thank you very much. Thank you.